Hello, collectors. Welcome back to the channel. My name is Doug, and you're watching Joe Wood Collector. Today, we will be diving into another pre-war ball player from the Lawrence Ritter book, Glory Other Times. We will also be learning about Hiene Groh and his wonderful story and history from the early days of the 20th century. This is a card from my collection. It's from the M1015 blank bag set from 1916 when he played for the Cincinnati Reds. He was an exceptional fielder and the National League top third baseman in the late 1910s and early 20s, and led all Major League third basemen with a WAR from 1915 through 1920. Groh captained championship teams with the 1919 Reds and the 1922 Giants and was known for his sideways stance, bottle-shaped bat, and choking up on his bat. He played in the Major League Baseball from 1912 to 1927, spending most of his career with the Cincinnati Reds and the New York Giants. He finished his career with the Pittsburgh Pirates. Let's now dive a little deeper into another fascinating player interviewed by Lawrence Ritter for the book, Glory Other Times.
This is the story about the early days of baseball. It is the story of what it was like and how it felt to be a baseball player at the turn of the century and in the decades shortly thereafter. This is also the story of America at the turn of the century and prior to World War I, a time of cobblestone streets and horse-drawn trolleys. It is the story of young man's hopes, his struggles, his triumphs, and his failures in what history has recorded as the quiet time. It is about the time when the fate of young men was seen as their own doing, and hard work was viewed as the pathway to success. It is about the time of carriages and hansom cabs, and the time when some men looked to the sky. It is about the time in baseball when Ty Cobb would win 12 batting championships in 13 years and had a .371 average in the one year he didn't win. It is about the time when home run champions could win the title with 6 or 10 or 19. It is about the time of John McGraw, Iron Man McGinty, and Christy Mathewson. The time of Walter Johnson, of Rube Marquardt, Tommy Leach, and Honus Wagner. All these were honored in their generation and were the glory of their times.
There was a period of about 15 years there where it seemed like if anything real big happened, I was right on the spot. Like a guardian angel, you might say. Or a lead nickel, maybe. Take your choice. Like when Fred Snodgrass muffed that fly ball in the World Series in 1912, when Fred Toney and Jim Vaughn both pitched no-hitters in the same game in 1917, when the Black Sox threw the World Series in 1919, when that ball hit a pebble and bounced over Freddie Lindstrom's head in the World Series in 1924, you name it, and I was there. Some writer once called me the ambiguous Mr. Groh, 'cause it seemed like regard less of what was going on, or where, I'd be somewhere around the premises. Or was it the ubiquitous Mr. Groh? I don't remember, but you get the idea. Take that double no-hitter, for instance. It happened in Chicago in 1917. I was leading off and playing third base for Cincinnati that day. Both Fred Toney and Jim Vaughn pitched 9 no-hit innings, and at the end of the 9th the score was 0-0. Not a single person on either team had gotten a hit. Amazing. Actually, Vaughn had walked me twice, so I was on first base a couple times during the game, but each time the next man up hit into a double play. Do you know who won that game for us in the 10th inning? It was Big Jim Thorpe, the great Indian athlete. He was playing right field for us that day. Larry Kopf, our shortstop, got the first hit of the game, a single to right field, in the 10th inning. Then he went to third when Hal Chase hit a line drive that the center fielder dropped. Then, with 2 out, Jim Thorpe got the second hit of the game, a dinky infield single that the pitcher couldn't handle, and Larry scored on it. Fred Toney kept the Cubs hitless in the last half of the 10th, and so we won, 1-0. I don't think that's ever happened before or since, both pitchers in a game pitching no-hitters. So it's a big thing when you look back at it. But that day, when it happened, most of us didn't realize what was going on until it was all over. In a game where the score is 0-0, everybody gets so tense worrying about their own jobs that they don't have time to keep checking on does the pitcher have a no-hitter going or not. We have our own problems to worry about. That was the way it was with me, anyway. I had enough to do at third base to keep me busy, so I didn't realize what had happened until after the game had ended. And even then I thought, Well, that's interesting, and that was that. Now, though, it's a big thing. And Lindstrom in that 1924 World Series. Gee, we should have won that one. The 7th game of the series and all, and not once but twice the ball hits a pebble and bounces over his head. I guess the good Lord just didn't want us to win that game. That's all there was to it. By that time, you see, I was back on the Giants, where I'd started out in 1912. Well, of course, I didn't really start out with them. What I mean is that the Giants were the first club I played with in the big leagues. I actually began with Oshkosh, which was in the Wisconsin-Illinois League. That was back in 1908, when I was only 18 years old. I was planning to start at the University of Rochester that year. One day a fellow from this Oshkosh club came along and asked me if I'd like to play ball with them. Well, I believe I will, I said. We didn't have much money, and this looked like a good way pay my own way for a change. My father and mother didn't think too much of the idea, but they didn't try to stop me. Dad said, "Let him go. He'll be back." But I didn't come back. I stayed the whole season with Oshkosh. In fact, I played there 3 full years. I was a shortstop in those days, and I've got to admit that if it hadn't been for my fielding, I'd have been back in Rochester before they'd have even known I was gone. I know I hit 161 that first season, which didn't exactly lead the league. But I kept practicing and practicing at it, and the next year I hit about 285, and the year after that I made it to 300. That was in 1910. Then in 1911, after 3 years with Oshkosh, the New York Giants bought me and farmed me out to Buffalo in the Eastern League. I did pretty well there, so in 1912 McGraw brought me up the big city. That's how come I was there in 1912 when Snodgrass dropped that fly ball and the Red Sox beat us in that series. I never got into any of those games, but I was a Giant that season, sitting on the bench most of the time. They had a crackerjack infield, with Fred Merkle, Larry Doyle, Art Fletcher, and Buck Herzog, and I just couldn't break into that lineup to save my life. The next year, though, McGraw traded me to Cincinnati, and that's where I started playing regular, in 1913. I was a second baseman for the first few seasons I was with the Reds, and then they made me into a third baseman. We had a darned good club those years in Cincinnati, during the teens and early 20s. Hal Chase and then Jake Daubert at first base, Maury Rath at second, Larry Kopf at short, myself at third, and Eddie Rausch, Greasy Neal, Rube Bressler, and Pat Duncan in the outfield. With Ivy Wingo catching and a whole slew of terrific pitchers, like Epa Jepterixy, Dutch Ruther, Dolph Luque, Slim Sallee, Jimmy Ring, and Hod Eller. Old Hod had what we called a shine ball. What it was, he had a file in his belt, and every once in a while he'd rub the ball against that file. That was a good team, a real good team, and I still don't see why the White Sox were supposed to be such favorites to beat us in the 1919 World Series. I know how good Joe Jackson and Happy Felsch were in the outfield, but they weren't any better than Eddie Rausch. Why, Eddie used to take care of the whole outfield, not just center field. He was far and away the best outfielder I ever saw. And our pitching was just as good as theirs, for sure. Well, maybe the White Sox did throw it. I don't know. Maybe they did and maybe they didn't. It's hard to say. I didn't see anything that looked suspicious. But I think we'd have beaten them either way. That's what I thought then, and I still think so today. I played with Cincinnati from 1913 through 1921, and then they traded me back to the Giants, and I stayed there until 1926. So that's how come I played in so many World Series in 1919 with Cincinnati, in 22, 23, and 24 with the Giants, and then in 1927 my last year. I caught on with Pittsburgh and got in the series with them. So between 1919 and 1927, I played in 5 World Series with 3 different clubs. And if you count 1912, I was in 6 World Series altogether. I figure that's probably a record for anybody who never played with the Yankees. You know how they're so record-happy these days. Most errors by a left-handed right fielder on Saturdays where the date is an odd number, and all that. Well, there's one record I hold. Most World Series on the most different teams for a right-handed third baseman who didn't switch hit and who never played for the Yankees. If I didn't add that switch hitting in there, I think maybe my old roommate, Frankie Frisch, would take the cake. As a matter of fact, though, I think I still do hold the record for the highest season's fielding average for a third baseman. I got that because I have a strong chest. I get in front of that ball one way or the other, and if I couldn't catch it, I'd let it hit me and then I'd grab it on the bounce and throw to first. McGraw's the one who taught me that when I first came up. "Get in front of those balls," he'd say. "You won't get hurt. That's what you've got a chest for, young man." McGraw's also the one who started me using my bottle bat. When I first came up, he didn't like the bat I had, and he told me to try to get one with a larger barrel. But the large-barreled bats had large handles, and my hands were too small to grip a bat like that very well. See, I'm not too big. I'm 5'7", and I weigh about 160. That isn't real small, but it's not real big either. So I went to Spalding's in New York, and we went down in the basement, and right there we whittled on a bat until it was just what I needed. What I wanted was a bat with a big butt end but with a skinny handle so I could get a good grip and swing it. We whittled down the handle of a standard bat, and then we built up the barrel, and when we were finished it looked like a crazy sort of milk bottle or a round paddle real wide at one end and then suddenly tapering real quick to a thin handle. The handle part had to be longer than on most bats, because I choked up quite a bit and kept my hands a little apart, too. But I wanted it big starting right above my hands, so if I hit an inside pitch near my hands it would have some power. That bat weighed about 46 ounces, and all the weight was in the barrel, where it counted. You couldn't hold that bottle bat down at the knob end, 'cause the way the weight was distributed the ball would knock it right out of your hands. But I always choked up and chopped at the ball. I didn't swing from the heels. I'd chop at the ball and drive it over the infield. See? I had good luck with that bat, stuck with it from 1912 on and never changed. And for a guy who hit .161 his first season at Oshkosh, you see what it did. I had a lifetime average of over 290 for all the while I was in the big leagues, and one period there, 1917 through 1921, I hit about 315. And in the 1922 World Series, when we beat the Yankees 4 straight, I hit 474. I still carry 474 as my license plate on my car. Have every single year since 1922, as a matter of fact. I had the Yankees signs in that 1922 World Series. Not their pitching signs, their hitting signs. I knew when they were going to bunt and when they were going to hit away, which is something it's very nice for a third baseman to know. I figured them out in the very first game from what Miller Huggins was doing, and had them the whole series. That was also the series where Babe Ruth crashed into me at third base and almost started a real Donnybrook. Phew. The Babe wasn't doing very well. I think he only got 2 hits in the whole series, and the Yankees were getting beat, and I was hitting like nobody's business. So in the third game the Babe got on base, and when the next man up singled, Babe came tearing around into third, and as he came in he gave me the shoulder and sent me flying. I didn't complain. That's baseball. But the fans really got on him and gave him a terrific going over. When I finally got on my feet, the Babe said to me, "Kid, you know we're both entitled to part of that base path." "Okay," I said. "You take your side and I'll take mine. And if I ever find you on my side, you better watch out." Hell, I couldn't have budged that big guy if I'd have hit him with a locomotive, and he knew it, too. But you got to let them know who's boss, right? Babe Ruth was a nice guy, though. There's no doubt about that. I never held it against him. A ball player can't carry a grudge off the field, anyway. Never. As soon as that gate's closed out there, it's all over. You just forget it. Tomorrow's another day. You can't take the game home with you every night, or you'll go crazy before the season's half over. So much of baseball is mental, up there in the old head. You always have to be careful not to let it get you. Do you know that I was scared to death every time I went into a World Series? Every single one, even after I'd been in so many. It's a terrific strain. But once I'd fielded that first ball, it was just another ball game. Well, almost. Not quite, of course. People used to ask me, before a World Series started, "Well, how do you feel?" "I'll let you know after I handle that first ball," I'd say. If you handle that first ball clean, then you relax. It's when you mess up that first one that things go from bad to worse. You start worrying, and once you do that you've had it. Didn't I start to tell you about Freddie Lindstrom's tough luck in that 1924 series? Yeah, I thought I did. That was McGraw's 4th pennant in a row, and as it turned out it was to be his last. He was a fine man, Mr. McGraw was. I really liked him. I was the Giants' regular third baseman that year, but late in the season I tore my knee and couldn't play. So Freddie Lindstrom, who was only 18 years old then, was put in. The series was tied at 3 games apiece, and in the 7th game we were ahead 3-1 in the 8th inning. Then the Senators loaded the bases with 2 out. Bucky Harris slammed a sharp grounder to third and President and Mrs. Coolidge applauding the victorious Washington team as the winning run scores in the 12th inning of the 7th game of the 1924 World Series. Mrs. Coolidge was a particularly rabid Washington fan. Just as Freddie was about to field it, it took a wicked hop right over his head and 2 runs scored to tie the game. And then in the 12th inning the exact same thing happened. A grounder to third hit a pebble again, bounced way over the kid's head, and we lost the game and the series, 4-3. It wasn't Freddie's fault. It could have happened to anybody. He never had a chance to get the ball. It was fate, that's all. Fate and a pebble. I stayed with the Giants 2 more years, but I didn't play very much after 1924 because my knee never got well again, and they let me go after the 1926 season. I was 37 then, and you don't play very much third base at that age, anyway. I was lucky though, and good old Donnie Bush picked me up as a utility infielder for the Pittsburgh Pirates in 1927. So I got to see another World Series for free when Pittsburgh won the pennant that year. That was the first year both the Wayner boys were in the outfield for Pittsburgh, and it sure was a delight to watch those 2 play baseball. Criminy sakes, could they ever hit? No bloopers, either. All line drives. And both of them fast as antelopes. That was my last season. I knew it would be. So I just sat back on the bench and watched the Wayners go to it. Boy, that's the way for an old guy to pass the time of day. Watching 2 beautiful ballplayers like Paul and Lloyd starting out on what you just know are going to be real great careers. That was such a treat that I actually enjoyed that last season just as much as I did my first. Maybe even more.